Hey, church family, it's day 50, so of course that means we are on Psalm 50. It's kind of a long one, so we're going to read just the first 6 verses, but I encourage you to read the rest at some point later today. First 6 verses. Psalm 50, a psalm of Asaph. The mighty one, God the Lord, speaks and summons the earth from the rising of the sun to its setting. Out of Zion, the perfection of beauty, God shines forth. Our God comes. He does not keep silence. Before him is a devouring fire, around him a mighty tempest. He calls to the heavens above and to the earth that he may judge his people. Gather to me, my faithful ones, who made a covenant with me by sacrifice. The heavens declare his righteousness, for God himself is judge. Selah. I wonder if you're like me and you sometimes fall into the trap of imagining a rather passive God. We see throughout the Old Testament God acting in big and powerful ways. He creates the earth, he splits the Red Sea, he causes bread to fall from the sky. It can be hard to realize that that same God who did those things is the one who is living and active in our lives today. And we read about Jesus and the power of his miracles in the New Testament. We see that he calmed the wind with just a word. He restored sight to the blind, and he even called Lazarus out of the grave. But again, it can be hard to realize that that same Jesus is seated at the right hand of God the Father, interceding on our behalf daily. And so let's see how this psalm actually trains our eyes, our ears, and our hearts to look, hear, and believe in the God who moves. So look how active God is in this psalm. God speaks, summons, and shines. The same God who brought the earth out of nothing with just a word is the God who is speaking today. We see in verse 3 that God comes. He does not keep silence. He moves with power and majesty. And God calls in verse 4. He judges his people and he gathers the ones who know him. This psalm, these 6 verses show us that God will not be diminished or refused or diverted from his purpose of giving glory to himself and acting for our good. His work, his promises are accomplished by the power of his word and the strength of his Holy Spirit. And again, I wonder if you're like me and sometimes it feels like you're looking for God, listening for God, and you can't seem to hear him. Friend, our God is big. Verse 1, he speaks and he summons the earth. Who else has the authority to do that? Our God speaks and he brings the dead to life. Who else has the authority to do that? Our God speaks and we can hear him. So as you read this psalm yourself today, these 6 verses and then the rest up through verse 23, take a moment and I encourage you, write down a time that you have personally seen God's power demonstrated in your own life. The God who rained manna from heaven to sustain his people is the same God who sent the living bread to us to sustain us. So let's record what's happening in our lives to give God the glory. Part of the Christian walk is remembering who God is and how he moves. So today, let's remind ourselves that our God is bigger than we could ever imagine.